Okay, today to celebrate Shavuot and our rabbi's presentation, I'm going to read a quote from Sevilla Martin's famous poem in 1905, His Eyes on the Sparrow. But I rewrote it to be a little more appropriate to me, and I call it My Eyes on the Sky. Whenever I am tempted, whenever clouds arise, when songs give place to sighing, when hope within me dies. I draw closer to the sky, from care it sets me free. My eye is on the sky, and I know it watches me. My eye is on the sky, and I know it watches me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
David.
Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kichan b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We give thanks to God who sanctifies us with commandments, with life-sanctifying acts, and invites us to busy ourselves with the study of Torah. One comment of the immediate background, quite a while ago, it was actually Michael Gervan who challenged those of us who were on a particular discussion one morning and said, which do we think is the most important of the 10 Commandments? And that provoked a certain conversation that we continued briefly when we got to the time of the 10 Commandments in the Torah portion of Yitro, which is chapter 20 of the book of Exodus. And then that was postponed, that discussion was postponed for quite a few months, and then with COVID and a number of other situations, and then we kind of focused here on the second day of Shavuot, when traditionally we recall the revelation at Mount Sinai, and the traditional Torah portion is the 10 Commandments as it appears as they appear in the book of Exodus. So we thought we would reschedule it for today, and we'll see where today takes us. And as I said, I would not be surprised if the understanding is that we'll continue with further discussions as we go on between now and I think it's about the third, fourth week in July, which is when we would get to the inclusion of the 10 Commandments as they appear in the book of Deuteronomy, in Devarim, in that regular cycle. So that's comment of background of where we come from as a study group, how we got to today. So let me give a few other comments of background. I certainly would make the assumption that all of us are somewhat familiar with this section of of sacred scripture, of Mikra Kodesh, that most people refer to as the 10 Commandments, although that's not really a Jewish statement. The best Jewish statement, actually, forgive me, comes from the Greek. It is Decalogue, Dexilogi, or the 10 legal statements, if you will. Although, again, I'll have some comments on whether they're actually legal statements. In actual Jewish literature, we don't separate out necessarily these 10 statements. And they're called, in other places in the Torah, they're called the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 statements or the 10 utterances, or even the 10 things. We don't necessarily separate them out from the 613 mitzvot that are collected in the Torah. But most of the focus, of course, has been on these 10, at least symbolically, not necessarily because of what they say, but the symbolism and the imagery that these were the 10, and we can have a discussion as to why, but these are the 10 that were placed on the 2 tablets of stone. And as much as the 2 tablets of stone that Moses brought down twice, actually, from Mount Sinai, the first time he actually dropped them or smashed them, or however you want to interpret it, And then God rewrote them and inscribed them, or had Moses inscribe them, carve them into the tablets. But the two tablets of stone, most of you have probably seen in one place or another in every synagogue around the world. There's at least a picture of, if not an actual depiction and image of the two tablets, and it might have the Hebrew letters going down the sides to refer to number one, number two, number three, Aleph, Bet, Gimel. The first word of the actual quotation happens to be Anochi, which starts with the letter Aleph. So sometimes you'll see just the first letter of each sentence. Sometimes they'll do Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, and numbering them up to 10, 5 on each tablet. So the two tablets, along with the menorah, the seven-branched candelabrum, and the Star of David, the Magen David, are the three most visible symbols of Israelite history and Jewish history. Okay, as I mentioned before, these particular words, and let's call them words for the time being, not commandments or utterances or statements, do appear twice in the Torah. Think of it in terms of the first time is when it happened, and in the book of Exodus, a month or so after the children of Israel successfully, safely had crossed through the Sea of Reeds, not the Red Sea, but the Sea of Reeds, and they established themselves as a free people, and then they begin their wandering. Although at that point they're in a specific direction, and they come to the mountain of God. In the Arabic tradition, it's known as Jebel Musa. It's Mount Moses, but we know it as Mount Sinai, or with a different author, it's Mount Horeb, or even the mountain of God. Then the second time, and we encounter them as Moses teaches them or pronounces them to all the people. The second time then is 39 years and some months later, with an entirely new generation of Israelites, as well as 39 years and several months of experience as free people rather than as slaves. And now all that they have encountered and all the experiences that they've gone through during their wandering, now as they are nearing the time when they will cross over into the promised land. Moses, of course, will not do that. So the book of Deuteronomy, of Devarim, in our tradition, is Moses's farewell sermon. And he's not only summarizing everything that happened to the people in their wandering, but he's also making them the experiences and the mitzvot and the laws and the incidents and the stories. He's making them as relevant as possible to the people. Obviously, we don't have to do this as an audio-visual aid, but we've talked about this several times before. Obviously, when Moses, who is now an old man, he's burned out, he's tired, and he's been speaking for a long time already. And it's possible that either unintentionally or intentionally, he makes a few changes in the wording of these 10 statements, the Aseret HaDibrot, between when he received them at Mount Sinai and now almost 40 years later, when he's teaching them to this new generation of Israelites. Hence, as we will see, there are some differences. They might be minor, simple semantic differences, but we can still learn a lot from them. Some are very understandable as to why Moses may have changed the wording or the tone. Some may have been just, like I say, accidental, and he just didn't remember the exact word, and he came up with a different verb or adjective or whatever it might be. And some reflect, obviously, lessons that Moses, he himself, might have learned, if not all the people what they might have learned in those almost 40 years of their free existence, their freedom. So just one or two or three or four simple examples of what changes and how rabbinic tradition through the years has come to know that. The first is very familiar to all of us. In everyone remember what commandment, we'll read them all in a minute, but commandment of the 10, commandment number 4 is?
Remember the Sabbath.
Right. It's about the Sabbath day. Okay. In the in Exodus, the wording is Zachor et Yom HaShabbat. Remember the Sabbath day, as Gloria said. But in Deuteronomy, it's Shamor et Yom HaShabbat. It's observe or guard or preserve the Sabbath day. Also, there's a difference in the justification for the Shabbat day. And let's, imagine what it might be. In Exodus, we are told to remember the Sabbath day. Okay, that's something that's entirely new, not only to the Israelites, but probably to most people of the ancient world. They didn't get a day off. Slaves certainly didn't get a day off. And so when Moses says, oh, incidentally, you're going to have a day off, well, where does that come from? Why? Because when God created the heavens and the earth, remember, when God created the heavens and the earth, God rested on the seventh day. And one of the overriding themes that the rabbis have always said is that these 10 commandments, and again, whatever phrase you want to use, the 10 utterances, Aseret HaDibrot, the Decalogue, these 10 specifically are meant to allow us to relate more to God and to know and remember that what we do as human beings created in God's image matters to God. So when whether it's Moses, whether it's God, the words that are first given in Exodus of remember that there is such a thing as the Sabbath day. Don't worry about how you observe it. Don't worry about whether you're lighting candles or making one or two loaves of challah or doing this or answering the phone or not answering the phone. Don't worry about that. Just remember that there is a Sabbath day because that's a new institution. And why is there a Sabbath day? It's because you were created in the divine image and because God rested on the seventh day. So you do as God did. By the time we get to Deuteronomy, later on, after many specific statements that are made about Shabbat and the holidays and things like that, then Moses changes the word, he changes the verb, changes the imperative, not just to remember that there's a Sabbath day, but to specifically observe it in all the ways that we've talked about, in all the ways that you've experienced. It's not a new institution anymore. Now it's not just remember that there is, it's make sure that you observe it. And of course, we remember that there are those two, because in the Lecha Dodi prayer on Shabbat, one of the verses is Shamor v'Zachor. Those are the two verbs, remember and observe, although he puts them in the reverse order. I'll explain that in a minute. But remember and observe and remember the Sabbath day. And somebody have to answer a phone? Okay. I said the wrong thing about Shabbat, right? Okay. All right. So that's in Lecha Dodi, and they had to justify. They didn't believe the Kabbalists, especially Shlomo Al-Kabetz, who wrote Lecha Dodi. He didn't believe, as I did, that Moses changed the words. The lyricist of Lecha Dodi said no, that both words pardon me, both words were said b'dibur echad. They were said at the same time, and they meant the same thing. Dibur is the statement, and echad is one. So the Kabbalist or the liturgist said, "No, don't, Rabbi Roman, don't get involved in whether there's a different, the verbs and the imperatives mean something different. They don't. Zachor and Shamor mean the same thing, but dibur echad. But they said the same thing. Don't get involved in all these things that you're trying to share with your students there in Green Valley." But the reason that Al-Kabates, when he wrote L'Chadodi, the reason that he put Shamor, which is the Deuteronomy verb, before Zachor, which is the Exodus verb, is because you may remember, L'Chadodi, the verses are an acrostic. And the first letter of each verse spells out the poet's name. And his name was Shlomo. So his first verse had to start with the Hebrew letter Shin. And that's Shamor, which is the observed one, not the Zachor. Which, if his name was Zechariah, that would have been different. But his name was Shlomo, so he had to start with Shamor. Okay, you're getting a lot more detail than you thought that you were going to get here. There's another major difference that, again, the way that I would propose we think about it, or in comparison to the way that the traditional rabbis would have seen it, that in Shabbat, in Exodus, when it's listed who should observe or who should remember the Shabbat, I'm sorry, in Exodus, it's who should remember that there is a Shabbat. You, your wife, your son, your daughter, your et cetera, et cetera. By the time that's in Deuteronomy, someone else is added to that list, and that's your slave. In Exodus, the Israelites didn't have slaves or indentured servants or whatever you want to call them, okay? But by the time that they were 40 years later and their society was developing and people owed debts to each other and tried to pay off those debts by indenturing themselves to another family or another individual, now the slaves were part of the Israelite society. And so Moses, when he presents 10 commandments, said, and he's talking about Shabbat, he says, okay, not only for you and your wife and your son and your daughter, but also for your slave, as well as your cattle and your camel and whomever also get to rest on the Sabbath. So again, there's one I would suggest that that's something that Moses and the people have learned because of now their experiences, and they have a new, what do we say these days? The new normal, rather than what it was like in their first couple of weeks coming out of 400 years of slavery. The third one, or maybe it's the fourth that I'm giving as an example, is with the last. What's the last commandment of those 10? You shall not
covet.
Begins with a C.
Covet.
Covet. You shall not covet. Okay. And then you shall not covet, which means overly or utterly be lustful for, or whatever. And there's a list. You shall not covet your neighbor's household, your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's ox, your neighbor's ass, anything that belongs to your neighbor, etc. His Sony TV, his Tesla car, whatever it might be. All right. That's in Exodus. But by the time 39 years and several months later, by the time we get to Deuteronomy, and Moses is not only summarizing or repeating, he's also recognizing that this is a different society, new normal. And if you remember several chapters, well, several chapters earlier than this in the Torah, several chapters down the road from where we are in our Torah cycle. If you remember, Moses has been challenged quite a few times by several important women in the life of the Israelites. The daughters of Tzlofchad, Miriam, his sister, they've all challenged him to think that there's a new role. It's not feminism, but there's a new role that women are going to be playing, whether they're wives, whether they're daughters, whether they're daughters-in-law. But Moses is going to need to recognize that women occupy a different place rather than just being the property of their husband or of their father or of the titular head of the tribe, which was what it was in earlier Israelite history, and probably was in many of the peoples that surrounded them. So by the time that we get to the Ten Commandments now in the book of Deuteronomy, there's an entirely different verb. What Moses warns the men, saying, and you shall not, let's call it desire. It's hard to find an exact translation, but it's different than coveting. You shall not be overly desirous of your neighbor's wife, period. Nor shall you covet your neighbor's house or ox or ass or Tesla or a Sony TV or whatever else. So the lesson seems to be that whether Moses came up with that on his own or whether all the women started carrying around signs and said, Moses, remember that we are not property. We don't really know, but Moses obviously chose to make a very strong distinction between the women in the men's life, certainly the wife, and all of the house and the animals and other pieces of property. So there are major differences between the two. What I'm suggesting this morning is we get started with the utterances, the Decalogue, as it appears in Exodus. And then if there are some changes, if there are some notes and lessons that we can learn from what happens 39 years and X number of months later, we certainly will. So before we read, let me just give you try to plant in your mind, as I say, we're looking back at the two tablets, right? And I'm not sure which way it would play out on our Zoom screens, but going from right to go down the first 5 on the right side, according to the Hebrew, and then the second 5 on the left side. They actually, for symmetrical purposes, they divide out 5 and 5 for symmetry purposes. But thematically, there's the first 4 are joined together. Then the last 5 are joined together. And number 5 becomes the transitional statement, if you will. The first 4, and there's, as we will be seeing, there's great debate as to exactly which statements are numbers 1 and 2, and depending on how you want to read it. And it's not just between Jews and Christians, it's between Jews and rabbis of how we should understand what exactly are the first 4. But those are considered to be mitzvot bein adam lemakom. Mitzvot, again, commandments or statements, ethical imperatives, life-sanctifying acts, however you wish to translate it, between human beings and God. The last 5 on the second tablet are considered mitzvot bein adam lechavero, between a human being and his or her neighbor, friend, another human being. And number 5, as I said, is the transition. Number 5 is honor your mother and your father, which is later switched around so that we're totally equivalent here, and it's the other one is honor your mother, your father and your mother. One is honor your father and mother. One is honor your mother and your father, because when we honor our parents, we show honor to God. Is the way that they kind of explain why it becomes the five and five. Incidentally, recognizing that, for example, Rambam Maimonides says that there actually aren't 10, there are really 12. But if you want to try to have a multiple choice test or something, we can try to find at least 12. And if you really count up all of the thou shalts and thou shalt nots in this particular section, there are actually 16. So you can imagine how over the centuries people have disagreed as to which exactly are the 10, and why, and what that should mean. Okay, so there's my excuse me, there's my half an hour background. If you have a Torah, if you have a Chumash or a Bible in front of you, we're at chapter 20 of the book of Exodus, and if you don't have it, that's okay. And before we start reading exactly, I want to plant a seed. On the one hand, I wanted to have you keep in mind the two tablets, and the 5 and 5 are 4 plus 1, and then the 5. On the other, here's an overriding question. Those of you who are familiar with Torah readings, whether you do it on your own, and it can be Bible, it doesn't have to be, but I'm focusing specifically on the 5 books of Moses here, and the structure of what sentences look like. More often than not, a paragraph, not always, but more often than not, a paragraph in the Torah will begin with something like, the Lord spoke to Moses, or the Lord spoke to Abraham, or the Lord spoke to Jacob, or Adonai, or God spoke, or God said to Aaron, or God, whatever. But it just doesn't end right there. It might say, speak to the children of Israel. It might say, God spoke to Moses and said, speak to Aaron and his sons. That's the way last week's Torah portion was. Things like that. Chapter 20 of the book of Exodus starts, Vadaber Elohim et kol hadvarim ha'ele lemor. God spoke, or God said, all of these words, all of these things, okay, as follows. But it doesn't say to whom God was speaking. Jewish tradition certainly says God is speaking to all the people of Israel in every generation through Moses. But it's an open question of why everywhere else in the Torah, it says God spoke to Abraham, God spoke to Jacob, God spoke to Moses, God spoke to Miriam, God spoke to, here it just says God spoke. And so the question is, dafka, taka, for these phrases, which is one of the reasons why they've been so identified and so separated out distinctively, because it doesn't say, that there's no indication that this should be only to Moses, or only to the heads of the tribes, or only to the priests. Jewish tradition says these are open-ended. They are for all to hear, and the expectation then is for all to do. Okay, so you probably know that the text will continue and say the children of Israel, when Moses comes down with the children of Israel, when they heard the words, say, all that God has spoken, not all that Moses has spoken, all that God has spoken, we will do we will hear. So with that in mind, Do we have a volunteer to read?
I will.
Okay, Ricky. So it's chapter 20 of Exodus. If as we go, if someone has a major question, we're going to come back to all of them. But if someone has a major question, or if you're reading a translation that's a little bit different and you want to know if there's a significant implication in the different translation, stop Ricky or raise a hand or shout out, and we'll see where we are. Okay.
What does Hashem mean?
Hashem means the name. And we'll actually get to where that originates from, as to whether you say God's name or whether you say the name, to avoid one of these, or maybe even two of these statements.
Like I am Hashem thy God.
Rather than saying I am Adonai, or in some translations I am Yahweh, or even in some non-Jewish translations, I am Jehovah. Rather than inadvertently pronouncing God's name, which tradition says we're not allowed to do, people will say Hashem.
Because those are non-Orthodox.
Okay? If you listen carefully, people who are very, very devoted to that idea, they'll not only say Hashem, they will also, instead of Adonai, they'll say Adoshem. Instead of Eloheinu, they'll say Elokeinu. Right? They'll change the wording, the pronunciation just a little bit to, as we say, to make a fence around the Torah, to make sure that not even inadvertently we're making a mistake and pronouncing God's name at a time when we shouldn't. That's where that comes from.
Thank you.
Okay. Ricky.
Okay. God spoke all these words, saying, I the Lord am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods beside me. You shall not make for yourself a sculpted image or any likeness of what is in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am an impassioned God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children, upon the third and upon the fourth generations of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not swear falsely by the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not clear one who swears falsely by his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or daughter, your male or female slave, or your cattle, or the stranger who is within your settlements. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and sea, and all that is in them, and he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Honor your mother and your father and mother, that you may long endure on the land that the Lord your God is assigning to you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female slave, or his ox, or his ass, or anything that is your neighbor's.
Okay. All right.
Exodus, they didn't have the slaves. I thought
It's a different word for slaves. It's more like workers here, rather than those who are committed to indentured slavery.
Okay.
But you're right. I just was double checking that as I thought. Okay. So here's my question, dear friends. What's commandment number 1? You read, I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage.
shall not make.
Okay, and then
Idol.
then
You shall have no
continues,
other gods
you shall
beside
have no other gods besides me. What's number one?
The second sentence there.
Preamble.
Oh,
Well, the commandments have the
Suzanne, go ahead.
the first commandment is, I am the Lord your God.
How is that a commandment? I thought a commandment had to be you shall or you shall not.
Your duty.
So I think he's clarifying that he is the God of the Israelites, and there should be no doubt in anybody's mind who God is, who their God is.
Okay, so in
Wrong,
other
but-
words, what I was facetiously saying, the commandment doesn't have to be worded as this is what you should do or shall do or must not do, whatever, okay? But recognizing, or as Maimonides would say, having both faith, belief in, and knowledge of Adonai, the one who brought us out of Egypt, that's number one.
Mhm.
Okay, Gail, please.
So, but it's, the commandment is, this is what you need to know. Or you shall know this.
Well, Maimonides says you shall know it. Actually, he says belief comes first. You shall believe it and then know it.
Right, but that's, so it's not a commandment in the usual sense, like you're saying. Yeah. It's just a statement. It said, this is what it is. This is the fact.
But there's still an active, conscious determination on your part to agree with it or to accept it. Okay, you can. What's the phrase? This is your mission. Should you decide to accept it, you know, if you choose not to accept it, that doesn't mean that there is no God. That means it's not your God, right? Okay, the mission is still there even if you don't accept it. So I had a professor in undergraduate school who was talking. He again, it was somewhat facetious, but he said this is God. The 10 Commandments are God's like passport or ID card, better ID card. Here's my name. Here's my occupation. I bring people out of Egypt. Okay. Where's your picture? Sorry, no picture allowed. You know what? This is kind of God presenting himself, herself, itself. But beginning with the statement, this is who I am. This is my name, if you will. This is how you know me. And that's traditionally, that's understood, even though it's not in the form of you shall or you shall not. That's traditionally considered mitzvah or statement number one. Okay.
It's a condition. It's a condition.
It's not only the condition, it's the reality.
Right. And without that, everything else falls.
Exactly. Yeah. And everything else flows from this. Eitz Chaim, says the difference between the laws of other cultures and these kind of statements is that these are absolutes, and if you don't accept them or if you reject them, realize that it's not only a matter of law and legality, but it's also a matter of ethics, right or wrong. And I think going back to the very original thing that Michael had brought up is that these can be understood, almost all of them, as ethical statements, as patterns of life, not just that these are laws that go on the books. These are things that society needs us to pay attention to in order to be a good, just, fair, ethical society. Am I putting the right kind of words in your mouth, Michael?
No, that's correct. Thank you for pointing that out. But I may have to leave a little sooner
Okay.
But if I could kind of sidestep a few of these things and just briefly, I want to ask you this. See, when I studied this previously, I always referred to the commander, who God. God commanded the 10 Commandments, and in this study, I usually talked about the commander. We know the commander is God, but that kind of seems to be put together. And I did talk about, we didn't get to that yet, but which commandment, which I personally feel, which is very, very important. But and I don't know when you're going to have time to go do another a talk of the 10 Commandments, because you're not going to be able to do this in one session. I know
Right.
that's not going
Absolutely.
to happen. Then the final thing I wanted to ask you is, in your opinion, this would be your opinion, Rabbi,
Yeah.
an Orthodox rabbi conducting a study of the 10 Commandments, how would that differ, if any, from a Reformed rabbi such as yourself conducting this study?
That's a very good question.
It doesn't drop them.
Well, there would be enough. I'll start with the simplest, and I'm not trying to be humorous or anything. One thing is that the Orthodox rabbi would have a kippah on, which I don't. Okay, that would be one. Secondly, is that men and women would not be here studying together. That's something else. Respectfully, that's the way that they believe. But I think the major difference would be that when I look at this, and not just teaching the 10 Commandments, but when I look at all of the body of what we call Mikra Kodesh, of sacred literature, I look at it as sacred in the sense that all of this literature is human. Its sources is human. It's written by people. It's an anthology of people's thoughts, experiences, beliefs in trying to bring holiness into their lives and know God better and believe in God in a stronger way. Okay? But it's a human endeavor, whereas the Orthodox rabbi starts from a different perspective. It starts from the perspective that all of this literature was written or given by God to us.
More literal.
I'm sorry?
It's literal.
That it
They
will.
they take it literally.
Yeah, that it's actually that's actual literal. And if there is a contradiction, or if there's a change or something like that, it's not because it's a human document and humans make mistakes. It's because we haven't reached the level of scholarship and of faith and devotion to be able to totally understand what God meant by the statement, by the words, by the. So I think that's probably the biggest difference, that the beginning, the starting point is the authorship, okay, or the origin of the literature. We both consider it holy. We both consider it, unique. We both consider it specifically Jewish, to understand life from a Jewish perspective. The question though is where it comes from. Does it come from God, or does it come from humans trying to understand God a little better?
When you mentioned the Shabbat, that early on in the discussion, you mentioned Shabbat. It appeared to me that, just generally speaking, that an Orthodox rabbi would take the Shabbat a little bit more seriously than what you had described. I can't remember the words, but what you were stating about the keeping the Shabbat, the rules and the regulations of keeping the Shabbat.
Definitely.
Well, I think in a sense I agree with you that when Shabbat is presented in Exodus, again, only a matter of weeks, if not months, from the children of Israel coming out of 430 years of slavery. They didn't know what a Shabbat was. And rather than beginning with a whole list of things that you should do, shouldn't do, cannot do on the Shabbat, Moses begins, and again, this is up to the interpretation of whether it's God saying through Moses or whether it's whether it's Moses and the biblical author trying to get us to understand. We have to understand the notion of a Shabbat first before being I don't want to say burdened, that's the wrong word, but before being given the privilege of observing the Shabbat. In our day, every time we sing the Kiddush, every time, like I said, we sing Lecha Dodi, we acknowledge that there are two reasons. There's because God rested on the seventh day, and because we have the privilege of becoming free people, and we can choose to observe Shabbat. But so that's the way that I would see. I'm not trying to belittle it, in any way. It's just when you start with, I guess, different methods of pedagogy, of how you teach. Do you start to teach, and they're legitimate people both ways. Do you start to teach with all the details, or do you start to teach with the generalization and get people to understand the generalization, and then go on to specifically how it affects you and how it affects those for whom you are responsible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
You have a very good memory, Rabbi. I want to tell you, you have an excellent memory.
Thank you, Michael. I try.
Excellent. Strong.
I still make mistakes, as we all know.
Well, listen, sometimes I make a mistake, but I'm never wrong.
Got it. Okay. Good.
I can attest to that.
All right. Back to, and are we back to, what's the first commandment? And is it, I am the Lord your God, or I am Adonai, or for Gary's sake, I am Hashem, or whatever it is. I'm the one who brought you out of the land of Egypt. That's the I forget who used the word, but that's the fundamental principle, okay, from which everything else flows. Incidentally, two of the most famous of biblical commentators from Spain back in the 1400s, both say, no, that's not a commandment. That's just an introduction. That's the premise, if you will. Maimonides, however, as I mentioned before, Maimonides says, no, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. That is number one, because it's the most important one to accept and then to believe in. And those of you who took philosophy 101 in college will remember the phrase, the first cause, right? Okay, that's Aristotle, and that's also Maimonides, all right? Everything else has to proceed from the first cause. And so in other words, there's no justification, no validity to any of the other statements if you don't accept, believe, and know, because Maimonides is focused on knowledge as a scientist, as a physician, that if you don't know that there is a God, okay? So in mainstream Jewish tradition, I am the Lord your God, that's number one. Gary, did you want to ask something?
Yeah, like on thou shalt not have any other gods before me.
Yeah.
Is the reason for that the Bible authors knew that for so many generations that the peoples worship so many different types of gods?
Well, yes. The Torah does not deny that there are other gods.
But don't?
No,
Says you
Nope.
can't worship.
Nope. Torah accepts that there are other gods, whether they are called by their worshipers divine, whether they're just more like in the sense that of judges or rulers, but the word Elohim absolutely is acknowledged. God, but our God is more powerful, more mighty, more awesome. Maybe even our God is the one who created the other gods, and we think of them more like angels. But the Torah does not deny that other peoples have other gods.
And
Other
they're
peoples, but not our people.
Not well, no, and that's what all the thing is do not be swayed, do not follow other gods, or if there are other gods, make sure you don't put them as being more important than me. I'm head honcho God.
and they're
Okay?
considered false
I'm the big
gods.
kahuna. I'm number
Yeah.
one.
And they're considered false gods and the way we look at them.
The way we look, right? False gods for us. That doesn't mean that they're false for others, but we would hope that others might choose to reject those gods and join and follow our God. Yes,
Yeah.
Suzanne.
Yeah, I think, they've just come out of Egypt, and when you look at the 10 plagues, they were, those plagues were against the Egyptian gods, the little g gods.
Right.
Kind of, I mean, you could look at it like a spiritual smackdown, so to speak. And I think what God is doing here is re-emphasizing that he's number one
Mhm.
and not any of these other little g gods.
Mhm. Right. Okay. The now there's Ricky. I'll be with you in a second. There's interesting way of looking again at the Hebrew. Lo yihye lecha Elohim achirim al panai. Don't have any other gods in my face. Okay.
Before
Not
me.
necessarily in front of me. Not necessarily over me. They're all legitimate translations, and they can speak to you however you wish it to. Don't have any other gods besides me. But the Hebrew is in my face.
Oh.
Okay. And so or over my face. And you can have to try to figure out what does that mean in the idiomatic expression of thousands of years ago that Moses or the biblical author was using. But what does it mean to us? There's no question that throughout history, Jews have seen that phrase and said, okay, no other gods beside our God is like I said, is the head honcho God. Okay. But it also means don't try to take anything else as a God in my place.
Mhm.
And so we're not the first ones in our generation to talk about you making wealth into a god, okay? Or making fame and celebrity status into a god. There are lots of references to that kind of idol worship, if you will, that comes from this statement. Okay, Ricky, then Michael again.
Yeah, okay. To get specifically to Gary about did we believe that there were other gods? I mean, verse 3 is very clear, you shall have no other gods beside me. But here the gods is, in the translation is lowercase g. I don't see in that sentence that the other gods that the Hebrews are acknowledging that exist, I mean, the henotheism of what was going on at the time, that's necessarily saying that our God is bigger than their God. It's just that there are other gods. They could all be equal. I mean, there was nothing in that sentence that made me think, that Hashem was like a greater God than the other gods that the other people
Right.
had.
As a matter of fact, it's not, when we continue on in the paragraph, it's not that God is greater, it's that our God is a jealous God. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotta remember that. Don't make any molten gods, don't make any images, don't
Yes.
worship anything else. Otherwise, I'm going to be very, very jealous. Okay. Yes, Michael.
Yes, as you mentioned, idol worship. I believe I read in a passage in a siddur that one who practices idol worship will become like them. They will have they have eyes, but they can't see.
Right.
They have mouths, but they can't speak,
Right.
and so on and so forth. And if you practice that, those who practice will become like them, or something to that effect.
Sorry. That's my phone and I can't turn it off right now.
Yeah, go to voicemail.
It will, sooner or later. They want money, it'll go into voicemail.
So,
Okay.
would you respond to what I said, Rabbi?
I'm sorry, Michael. I'm kind of half focusing on the thing. Could I ask you to repeat it?
Yeah, and as you stated about idol worship, the one who practices idol worship shall become like the idol.
Right.
In other words, the idol can't see, they can't
Right.
hear, they can't speak, and if you practice that, you shall become like them. That's the way it's stated, and at least in an Orthodox passage that I read.
Not just Orthodox. It's a very well known phrase in teaching.
Right.
You know, absolutely, and it's based on the refers to that midrash that with Abraham confronts his father. You know, that if these idols don't have mouths and they don't have, then why are you worshiping them? Why are you making them so important? Etc. Good point. Okay, so if we go on now, Ricky had already read it. Again, they're separated by verse 3 and 4, but they do link together. Not make yourself a sculptured image, not or any likeness of what is in the heavens above or on the earth below, or on the waters under the earth, which incidentally is the origin for the prohibition of Jewish artists not including human forms, right?
Right.
Because if we are created in the divine image, as it says in Genesis, then it's the same kind of thing as like Gary was asking about the use of the word Hashem. If we paint a picture of a human being, we might inadvertently be painting a picture of God. And we're told here specifically not to do that. So for generations, with very, very few exceptions, and you can even go into the modern times of Chaim Potok had a novel, the Asher Lev, I think was the one, right? Right. Okay. That Asher Lev was grew up in an Orthodox community, ultra Orthodox community, but he wanted to paint. And there's this guy Shtisel in the television show now also. So this is another example of how there's been kind of a reworking, not of the wording of the commandment, but of what it might have meant. The only source of in Jewish tradition that goes back more than 1,000 years, where they did allow human drawing, drawings of humans, was in the Haggadah. Okay, in the Haggadah for Pesach, you could always have pictures of not only the Egyptians but of the Israelites and Moses and Aaron and whatever. And I don't know the reason of why that was allowed, but those there was back in Detroit there was professor of actually of Jewish art at Wayne State University, who we would hear lecture every once in a while, and he would bring in all kinds of examples and whatever. But he's the one who pointed that out, that it was only allowed. It was only by Jewish painters or Jewish artists. It was only allowed in the Haggadah until maybe the 16th, 17th century. But if you look at a Siddur, if you look at a Chumash, at a Torah, certainly not the Talmud or anything like that, you won't see depictions of human forms. Michael, Gloria, yes.
Rabbi, the way I understand it is when they put these pictures in, they thought the rabbis thought it was so important. This story, the significance of this was so important that they would always they wanted to illustrate it as well as the words. That's the way I.
You mean in the Haggadah?
Yes,
in the Haggadah. In the Haggadah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. It makes sense. Makes sense. Gloria?
Wasn't that also because God's image is supposed to be perfect? And I know that in our congregation, they had a portrait of the rabbi done, and he was missing a finger in the portrait. And the reason for that was
the rabbi God, is that what you said?
no. we had a portrait done of a rabbi, our rabbi. Whether he thought he was God or not is a whole other conversation.
Okay.
But anyway, in the portrait, he was missing a finger, and that was so that it wouldn't, it wouldn't be perfect like God is. That weird?
I frankly had not heard that, but on the other hand, it doesn't surprise me. It certainly would be a way of interpreting that.
That was a reform.
Yeah. By definition, if God is perfect, by definition, we are imperfect.
Right.
Therefore, you'd have to show the imperfections. But the question becomes, it's never simple, right?
I know.
A question leads to another question, is if that rabbi was a Kohen, because a Kohen cannot serve as a leader of the community with any kind of physical deformity.
Oh, no.
Aha, so have to figure that one out now too.
Yeah.
Yes, Ricky.
All right. If God is perfect and we are created in God's image, are we not perfect? And I've always said I'm a perfect Ricky. I'm a lousy Gail. I'm terrible at being Ruth Ann, but I'm a perfect Ricky. So we are perfect.
I like that.
That's fine, but I don't think that you'd find justification for that in Jewish law. No, it doesn't mean that you're not perfect, Ricky, and doesn't mean that you can't believe that. I just said I don't think that you could find a proof text for it. Doesn't mean that it's wrong to think that way.
As my soul is perfect, I am in the image of God. So therefore, if God is perfect and I am in that image, why am I not perfect?
Who knows?
Well, because you get into the contradiction. That's not the right word. You get into the tension between the perfection of that which is not human and the imperfection of that which, by definition, is human. Okay, you're going to lead me off into a different track here for a minute. The problem is not with what you're saying being inconsistent. Okay, and like I said, where you can't find the proof text. The problem is in the fact that we're trying to deal with this in human language. And human language, by definition, is not complete enough to describe God's perfection or exactly what our being created in God's image might mean. We can only guess at it. We don't really have the correct vocabulary. So that's what the issue is for me. Okay, it's not that you're pointing out an inconsistency. It's like, so here's the old one that they do in the yeshiva all the time, is God all-knowing and all-powerful? Well, according to Jewish belief and using those terms, yes, God is all-knowing and all-powerful. Okay, so if that's the case, can God build a wall so strong that it can't be knocked down? And you would have to say, well, yes, if God can do everything, if God is all-powerful, can do everything, God can build a wall that is strong enough that it can't be knocked down. But if God can't knock it down, then God's not all-powerful, right? Now, the issue is not a limitation of God's power. The issue is that we get caught up in our own semantics and vocabulary, is that we don't really have the right linguistic ability to describe God's all-powerfulness, omniscience, all-knowingness. Okay, we get hung up in that. So yes, you can certainly say, I am the best Ricky. I can't say that.
That's right.
But you can say, I am the best Ricky that I wish to be, that I hope I could be. But does that mean that you are perfect in the same sense that God is perfect?
I didn't say I was perfect. I said I was a perfect Ricky.
Okay, right. Okay, so that's where, and we would believe that Adonai, Hashem, whatever, is the perfect God, but there's a different understanding of the word perfect, because one's relating to a human being and one's relating to a non-human being.
Well, that's like trying to define infinity.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Okay. All right. So
We haven't even gotten off the first commandment.
no, we're now on 2. Okay. You shall not make yourself any, make any graven images, etc., of anything that's above the, okay, then not only you shall not make them, but you shall not worship them.
Not bow down to them.
Don't bow down to them. Okay. Vanachnu korim umishtachavim. It's the same phrase, same verb. Gail will give you in a second. And you shall not serve them. That's avodah. Lota avdem is avodah, the same Hebrew word that we use for divine worship or serving God, rather than manual labor. It's avodah, which is service to God or to the divine. But then why? Why can't we do that? Why shouldn't we do that? That's where you have to go on at the end of the continuation of verse 5, because I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. This translation is impassioned, okay? And maybe there's big major difference between jealousy and impassion.
Yeah, okay. My Orthodox Bible says jealous.
I'm a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children until the 3rd and 4th generations of them that hate me.
Rabbi's frozen.
Frozen.
I hope he's not talking.
I think he's frozen.
His internet is unstable.
Not breathing.
I've seen that on our screen.
That's the internet here in Quail Creek. It's spotty.
Really?
Oops.
Oops.
He must have logged off to come back on.
It automatically tries to bring him back.
What's interesting is that, when you're looking at different Bibles, the way it's explained.
Sure.
I mean, the wording means the same, but it's presented a different way.
That's why we like to bring all these different Tanakhs to class.
Gary, you're gonna have to come to our Torah study on Saturday morning to understand what that does to us. Because there's sometimes we do one verse.
That's why
I understand that.
we're permanently warped.
Yeah, years ago, I went to a few of them.
Oh, it's gotten worse.
They're totally
Since we're
different
on
now,
Zoom.
Gary.
We're even slower now.
Yeah, it's totally different.
A year and a half later, almost 2 years later, we're still in Genesis.
Oh, it'll
There
probably
he
take
is.
us another year to get through Genesis.
Norman's back.
He's
He's
back.
connecting.
Oh,
You left us.
There are greater powers at work. I don't know if it's something I said or I know. All of a sudden, my internet went down. Oh, well, okay. Sorry about that. Gail, please.
Okay, you were talking about images.
Right.
I have to read what Friedman says. This is fascinating. And ladies, fasten your seatbelts.
This is Richard Friedman, right?
Yes.
Or Gary Friedman.
Not right. Yeah. Keep it straight.
Richard Elliott Friedman. Okay. Confirmation of the fact that the issue of making statues of God comes from archaeological evidence, because small figures of females are extremely common finds in Israel. Okay.
mhm.
However,
Yeah.
female figures often escaped the ban on statues, but male figures did not, because, God was male.
Gail,
Yeah.
we
So-
know that's wrong, right, Gail?
So, well, we know better, but,
Yeah.
but I think that's interesting, archaeologically, it says, go ahead and make women figures of women, but not men. Oops.
And your point being,
You didn't get the point?
okay. Ricky, did you want to? Was there something you want to say?
Actually, I could say something. Women could be immortalized as these little statuettes because they were not gods, but the men were the gods, so they couldn't be. So would be my justification for why there would have been.
You're stating the
Statues.
obvious.
Yeah, that's exactly.
At what point did the Jewish artists realize that they could paint male figures?
I don't know if the artist. It's a matter of that they could. It's a matter of whether the market. Somebody determined that the market could open up, and that they were allowed to. Some rabbi somewhere, obviously, just like some rabbi obviously said, okay, as of such and such a date, no more polygamy. He didn't base it necessarily on anything that was in the Torah. That's what society and that's what his people were saying to him. So probably the same kind of thing. A rabbi or a community leader, whatever, said, okay, it doesn't as long as we don't worship this image, but if we're using it, Michael was saying before, if we're using it to illuminate and to help educate, little children need those kind of visual images. Ask any 3-4-year-old, what does God look like? And they'll describe, Bubby or Zadie, kind of thing. So they need the visual images. So someone obviously made that. I'm not familiar with a specific date or name of who did it, but by
Renaissance time,
300 years ago, we started to see, not only from the Haggadah, but on walls of the synagogue or stained glass windows in the synagogues. You started to see biblical characters. They would do biblical stories, a lot of stories of Abraham and Isaac, Isaac and Rebecca, things like that on stained glass windows in European synagogues. Not so much that I remember in the Holy Land. but in Europe especially, and certainly when they came to the United States, because everything, when they, for all intents and purposes, when the first Jews, and they were Sephardic, when the first Jews came to the United States, or what became the United States,
Like in the 1400s?
well, you know, the late 1400s into the 1500s, 1600s, but they many of them liberalized their Sephardic traditions. So
Were these Jews Orthodox, or what were they categorized as?
well, all that there was Orthodox.
These are the ones
When
that were expelled from
Yeah,
Spain.
well, either expelled in the in 1492 in the from Spain, or
Yeah.
that came from other places in Europe into the 1500s. But there wasn't anything else besides Orthodox. There were different levels of Orthodox patterns and behaviors.
Well, there had to be, because when you mentioned the stained glass, there were portraits on stained glass showing these pictures. And the Orthodox that I remember, there was no stained glass windows. There was nothing. There was nothing behind the rabbi, just the ark with the Torah. And
No, in Europe especially. In Europe, especially, there's lots of stained glass windows. It may not go back to the 400 or 500 years, but if you look at videos and whatever that we have from the 1800s and early 1900s before the Shoah, there's lots of stained glass windows in the synagogues.
Right,
but in the main metropolitan areas. Ruth Ann?
Yeah. Yes, I understand that very well. What I'm referring to is the Orthodox that I grew up with in the Bronx, New York City, and that Orthodox there, not Europe, but here in the United States, basically on the East Coast. The reason for that, for no stained glass or no walls and no pictures, is the focus of the study of God. You're not looking at anything else to take your attention away from the study of Torah. And your focus, you see, that's what I'm saying, is your focus is on that study. So that's
and Michael, I'm not arguing, but I am saying that there were, maybe not in your community, but in the Midwest, I'm very familiar with it. And Northern California, I'm very familiar with it. There are synagogues that go back into the 19th century that certainly had stained glass windows, maybe not on the eastern wall, maybe not in back of the, in the synagogue, maybe only and it's not necessarily in the sanctuary. It could have been in the library. It could have been in the, in the school or something like that. Ruth Ann, you wanted to jump in.
Could it depend on the level of literacy of the population?
Yeah.
I mean, the same thing with the Haggadah. Okay. The Haggadah was something that was done, the Seder in the home. Okay. Where not everybody could be totally literate. So that's why the pictures were important. Whereas the Torah was read by the priest. It was read by people who were literate in what they were doing. So they did not need the pictures. And the same thing with the synagogues and stuff. It could be in the communities where more people were literate, then they didn't need the pictures. Where they were less literate, they needed the pictures.
Good, very good point. Very good point. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's see if we can finish up just this paragraph, if not the next. That again, depending, and I suppose it's a Rashi, it's a commentary for each of us, and our own God concept is how we want to translate that phrase. God says, don't make any other images, don't worship them, don't bow down to them, either because God says, I am jealous, or because I'm passionate about how I want you to, who's the subject of this? Is it don't worship them because I'll be jealous, and that's kind of demeaning to me? Or is it don't worship them because I'm more concerned for you, for your being able to have a proper and an appropriate and true understanding and belief of who I am? Is it God's passion towards us, or is it God's jealousy of and zealousness of maintaining that I need to know that in your minds I'm number one? What do you think?
Jealousy.
Jealousy?
Isn't jealousy coveting?
Jealousy can lead to coveting, but it's not, at least in the Hebrew terminology, it's not the same thing. But psychologically, I could see the connection. Suzanne, please.
God is the creator of everything. And it's so, to my way of thinking, he created the little g gods. So why would you want to worship an entity that is lesser than God himself?
Well, again, excuse the facetious response, but maybe it's the only way that you can win over the girl that you're trying to date, is by joining and worshiping her gods.
Well, I don't.
Which is more important, my happy love life or my devotion to God above?
I would say devotion to God above.
Oh, well, agreed, but not necessarily everyone.
And you got to get her to switch her alliances, because somewhere in the Bible it's we're told to love God. I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but to love him with everything we've got.
Right. All your mind, all your soul, all your being.
Right. And through him, we have life, we have everything. And I think we can, there have been times when in my professional life, when I had ideas I was working on, and some people would take them and present them as theirs. And that used to really tick me off because it, my work, my effort, and the ideas they were good ones. They worked out, and fortunately, in one case, I had a boss who figured out what was happening. And back then I wasn't quite as vocal as I am now. So I was a little shy about speaking up for myself. So, we are in God's image, and he has given us free will. And he smacked down the little g gods in Egypt, and the Israelites were exposed to all those Egyptian gods, little g gods. And I just see that.
And they will continue to be exposed to them with the Canaanites and the Ammonites and the Hittites and the Jebusites and all of their gods, right?
And Yahweh wants them to remember that he is number one. He is the one that helped them. No one else, no other. He did. And anyways, so that's how I look at it.
Okay.
For one.
Okay, sure. Anyone else?
Can I add one other comment?
Of course.
Off, just a tad off, but this image thing has bothered me for years about Sistine Chapel. if we're not supposed to, make images of God, I know that the painting of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel is revered in the art world and such, but it bothers me that they painted an image of God on that. It's always bothered me.
Well, I can't
They're
resolve
Catholic.
all of the
What?
Michelangelo was not Jewish,
right.
Well,
Yeah,
I know, but
you know.
but the tradition is the same, and the lesson
Right.
and the value is the same. I believe, far be it from me to profoundly quote the Catholic patristic fathers. Okay,
yeah, well, I'm not
But-
Catholic, so
but I remember. Well, I went to a Jesuit school, so we had to learn
Me too.
their stuff. Okay, but there's what they did, because Suzanne, your question and your concern, and and it bothers you, is not new. Is the difference between appreciating the artwork and having that art be a source of inspiration, as opposed to worshiping. Okay, you can worship in that holy place, but you're not worshiping the image. That's where they draw the distinction.
the distinction.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just, that doesn't fly with me, but
Okay.
that's just me. But
Okay.
that is at least it's an answer and something to think about.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah.
It bothers me.
Okay. All right. I'm afraid that we're gonna have to cut it there after only number 2. Look at that. So we have to arrange like six more sessions, and we might get through all of it and the repercussions. What I'd like to do, certainly if people are interested in continuing, and I hope that we would, whether it's around the time when we do get to Deuteronomy, a little bit later in the summer, if people are around, or if we're still with Zoom, we can do it from wherever we might be. But I'll look and see, does this time frame normally work for people, like a Tuesday morning?
Yes.
Is
Yes.
that usually a good time frame?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll work with Ruth Ann, and we'll look through the temple calendar, and we'll see if in another month or 6 weeks, if we can find a time to continue. And I'm going to make a mark that we got here in my notes, that we got through number 2.
Yay.
Rabbi,
Yes.
Rabbi, the sisterhood has, now not in June, but every other month, we have a meeting on the the second Tuesday of every month. And we have an event usually on the third Tuesday of each month. So.
Okay, but that would be on the temple calendar, right?
Yes.
Right.
Okay, good. Okay, so we can avoid it.
Okay.
If that means that we're looking at the third Tuesday or something like that, then we'll see.
First or fourth, yeah.
First or fourth, sure. Okay. All right, we'll see. I thank you, everybody. Chag Sameach again. Happy Shavuot.
Well, thank you for doing
And we
this.
Look forward to seeing you soon.
Speaking
And
of
thank you,
calendar,
Rabbi. and
Rabbi,
thanks for me.
do you have a couple minutes to go over the calendar, or are you?
Yes, I do, but I just have to check with Lynn of what the story is with Robin. But I'll
Bye
stay on.
now.
Go check and I'll stay here.
Yeah,
I'll check.
okay.
I'll be here. Go ahead, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, what happened with Robin?
So Ruth Ann, I have to send out the blasts and start up the Torah sessions Torah study while you're gone.
Next week. Yeah. Yeah. Next week. Amy, do you need help getting off?
No.
Because Rabbi and I are just going to talk about the calendar coming up and his vacation.
Okay.
So that's all.
I'm
And
signing off.
And I'm just taking this opportunity to do it.
See you later. Bye.
Yep, bye-bye.
Hi, Amy.
Hi.
Okay. Amy, okay, she's, okay. I have my calendar. It just seemed like this was a good time. Oh, and I do have one question.
You're very soft, Ruth Ann.
I'm
Is your
soft,
microphone down?
not to my knowledge. I'll move closer.
Okay, I can turn my
Okay.
volume up a little
Okay.
bit. Okay.
Okay, I do have one question, something be very interesting to talk about someday. Okay, if it hadn't been for the golden calf, if Moses had come down with the first, tablets, and the golden calf hadn't been there, would the Jews have then just gone straight to the promised land? And what would we be like today if it had not been for the golden calf?
Well, what do they call that? That's the kind of literature or write a play or a song or something that,
Yeah,
it'd be a whole different
it'd
premise.
be a whole different people.
Right.
Okay, so what's your calendar look like?
Okay. We talking about ritual calendar?
Yeah, your vacations, when you're
Oh,
going to
well,
go on
okay,
vacation, so
all
I
right.
know when, because I think the board decided after you left that we would like to keep to the live, because once you're immunized, we want to start the.
Yeah,
only
I saw that. I saw that. And okay, and all right. So our normal dates, the temple's normal dates for our June would be June 4, June 12, and June 18,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
Okay. The 18th, ideally, I won't be here.
Okay,
Okay. So that Friday, we'd need someone to lead services.
okay,
Then July 2nd, July 10, and July 16. I mean, technically, at this point, we're here. We're not going to be traveling much in July. Technically, I'm only contracted for, like it's supposed to be one weekend, but I don't have a problem with doing one of the Friday nights and the Saturday.
okay.
So
I mean, as far as it goes, I'm willing to, I know what the contract says, but but we're adults and we can, work around things if you need more time off at another time, rather than taking
right,
time off.
right. Well, that's what I'm kind of thinking.
Yeah.
So I suppose the Saturday morning it's certainly easier if I do it because then we've got Torah reading and whatever. So what I was thinking is that I would do this July 2nd, and then we see if we can get volunteers for the 16th.
Okay,
So that we don't have two in a row of volunteers. And then August, the first Friday night is the 6th, and I would be here, but then we're leaving on the 7th
okay,
and probably gone until for 3 weeks. And I'll be back like 10 days before Rosh Hashanah.
okay. So.
Okay,
basically
so
on the 14th, I mean, if we don't have a service on the 14th, it's no big deal.
okay. So I'll do this. I'll do the 6th, and then you decide how you want to handle the 14th and Friday night the 20th.
Yeah. Okay, and then September, you'll be back for September.
Well, obviously, yeah. We've got all the holidays.
Yeah.
October, I'm not sure, because there's a wedding there's actually two weddings in Detroit that they've invited me to come up with, but I think I can work around not having to miss any services
Okay,
because of,
well, let's just worry about the summer right now.
yeah,
Let's
yeah,
let's
that's
get us
okay.
through August. This way,
Right.
there's 3 services, and this way I can ask the Brotherhood if they want to do a service, the Sisterhood if they want to do a service, and I already asked, Mike and Joyce if they would do a
Okay,
service.
so why don't you give them the choice of either June 16, June 18,
18th.
July 16, or August 20,
Yep,
right?
right.
Okay,
Let me do that, and this way I can try to do that before we go away.
okay. That's fine.
Okay,
That works.
we're good. So
All
how's
right, so
Rob?
are you gonna reach out to Finkelstein's and Brotherhood and Sisterhood?
Yes, yeah,
Okay, fine.
I'll
All
reach
right.
out to
And
them.
I will be glad to work with them, if they want help in preparing something or looking at pages or alternatives or something like that. But if they don't, they can handle it themselves too.